Fall is right around the corner, and there are many important tasks that need to be done in the garden. For one, trimming back or ripping out your summer plants that are no longer producing. This applies mainly to things like squash, cucumbers, zucchini if they're no longer producing. Now, of course, the exception is if they're still blooming, like this one is. Look at those blooms and still producing, then leave it. You might want to trim it though, because it is starting to crowd out other plants. That is tip number one: trim or rip out any plants that are being unproductive. Tip number two is to top and trim off any suckers off of either your tomatoes, especially indeterminate tomatoes, or your melons. If you haven't seen my previous video on getting melons in less than 30 days, I encourage you to check out my channel and subscribe to see updates. But it's only been about 10 days since these melons were about this size, and they have grown tremendously. These will be ready to pick in about another week. And hopping tomatoes, these flowers will never come to bear fruit of any size, especially if they're, beefsteak. If your cherry tomatoes are blooming still, go ahead, because those ripen in, like 2 weeks at most. But if you want to get more tomatoes and you have some already growing on your plant, just go ahead and pinch them off, because they will never come to fruition. Also, same with your peppers. It's a lesser case because peppers do ripen quite a bit faster, and you can always pick your peppers green. That's not a big deal. And as you come over here, you can also, tip number three would do is heal in any of your propagated cuttings. Alright, here I have a oak leaf hydrangea and some jasmine cuttings, and then I have a lemon cutting, because you don't want to plant them in the ground because you'll disturb the roots and they might not make it. You want to make sure just to shelter them in an unheated garage or basement maybe for the first year, and the next year plant them out so they have a full year of getting the roots down deep and getting established, especially for sensitive plants like lemons that can't handle anything under about 25 in a pot. And also making sure to trim your plants. That'll be task number 4. As we can see, I did trim this barberry bush. This is a perfect time to trim just before winter on most things, except for like lilacs. You don't want to trim lilacs right before winter because their blooms form on this year's wood, so you'd be trimming off blooms. Just keep an eye, the 5th tip, keep an eye on your plants for diseases, especially as they head into winter. Sometimes it's more, humidity, more moisture in the air. You want to make sure your plants are healthy going into the winter. Tip number 6 I would do is fertilize right about 40 days before your first frost date with a slow release fertilizer. The last time I would ever use a fast release fertilizer or a liquid fertilizer on your perennial plants is about 5 to 6 weeks before. I have not fertilized any of my perennials, especially the fruit perennials, and it's been a few weeks already. But go ahead and do a granular dose of fertilizer right about now, October or early October, late September, depending on your first frost date. I've already done mine since my frost date is right around 30 to 35 days from now. And that will set you up for success, because they'll take that fertilizer, put it into the roots, and they'll have a good strong root system for next year. Hopefully you'll get a lot of fruit. Tip number 7 kind of goes back to tip number 1. Cut back any of your perennials that are dying off, like these lilies. Those will definitely fade as well as the season goes on. Tip number 8, clean out your hanging baskets as soon as frost hits. That's kind of a fall-winter tip, but these will look terrible once the frost hits them, unless you want to save anything. And that goes into tip number 9, is to save or take any cuttings of plants that you want to keep, like this geranium. If you want to keep the whole plant, dig it up, I have a video on my channel, one of my older videos on how to overwinter geraniums and checking up on them, so I encourage you to subscribe. But if you want to take any cuttings or save any plants that are frost sensitive, go ahead, take cuttings now. And once it gets closer to your frost date, go ahead and dig them out of the ground and store them in a garage or a basement, or however you do that, depending on the certain type of plant. If you have a plant that you would like to know about, go ahead, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll try and get that video out to you if I have that plant. So, just a couple tips. Now, a bunch of tips that are important for fall gardening and getting that ready. And that is also another tip. My final tip, whatever 9 or 10 it is, start a fall garden. It might be too late. I know it is for me. I've already put seeds down, but I haven't seen any actually popping out of the ground. So I will definitely learn from my mistakes, and I will be starting an early spring garden. So I hope that works out, and I hope you subscribe to see some of that. So until I see you in the next video, I'll probably put out a one tip video for winter gardening. Getting closer to the winter, preparing your garden for the winter. So I hope you subscribe to see that as well.